This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the thought is all, we'll go through this session and then we'll take a little bit of time after for it to download or whatever, and then I'll put it somewhere that you guys can, download the video recording from, and then you'll have that just so you can reference back for any questions, or if you're like, oh, I remember he said that, but I don't remember what he said after that, and then you can kind of, use that as a, a look back kind of tool. Okay, cool. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I thought, all the files and videos that you got, that's pretty thorough resources. So
Good.
with this, that'll be good. Thanks.
Cool. All right. So I guess I'm Charlie Kepler. I'm our lead pilot here at Headwall. I'm an engineer, so I kind of have my hands in a lot of different things. I do all of our flight testing and troubleshooting, and I'm in charge of our technical support. So if you guys ever have questions, it'll probably be routed to me. I kind of have my hands on a lot of different things, but one of the other things I do is kind of training people. So I've kind of allotted, I think, 3 hours today. If it seems like we need more time, we can always schedule a follow-up. I've kind of found that after 3 hours of me blabbing, my voice gets sore and people kind of start losing attention. So I kind of figure that's a good chunk of time, and if we ever need extra, we can schedule that after. But usually we can get through most of the stuff, and then after that you can kind of get going on things, and then reach out to me when you run into questions along the way. So I guess that's who I am. I know you guys are USDA. Have you, I guess, started using the system at all, or have you kind of just been waiting to kind of get some training before you start, poking around with it?
I've been waiting to get some training on it, and in particular on the BFD, but we're going to set that up for next month. But, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, they're really, really great, really helpful. I was actually just at their facility in New Jersey a little after Thanksgiving. It's a nice little, they're a small shop, probably about 10 or 15 people, but they're really helpful, really, they do a good job. So yeah, I can't really speak to too much of the UAV side of things, because the only BFD that I've used was the one that you guys have, and that was at this point a little over a year ago. So I might remember some things, but I might be a little rusty on anything related exactly to the UAV, but I'd probably just defer to them anyways, because they're the experts. Okay, so I guess if you guys want to give me a quick background on what you, I guess as much as you can, what you plan to be doing with this system, what you're going to be looking at, just so I can kind of have an idea of, what to tailor what I say to you about.
Okay, so some of the research we do is things with, for instance, crop chlorophyll content, nitrogen status. We do a lot of work with sort of satellite validation, I'd say, satellite remote sensing validation. Other parts of our lab are looking at, topography of wetlands and drainage. So that's where the LiDAR comes in. I know Billy's doing work with water samples, or looking at algal blooms in water, or signs of contamination, I guess, pollution. Yeah, so I have background in hyperspectral, but mostly from ASD units, not imaging systems. So,
cool.
That's where I'm at.
Okay, yeah, that gives me a little bit of just an idea of where you're coming from. So I guess any other questions or high-level things before we kind of jump in? No? All right, cool. So I'm going to turn my video off, just because sometimes when I'm going through these, I have a little bit of a lag if I have my video on. So I'm just going to turn that off to save bandwidth. Okay, so on the flash drive that I provided, there was this slide deck called something like training material or something. So I will share my screen and show that to you. Okay, can you see that now? There we go. So what this is, and there might have been a few changes since you received your system, so I can get and send you an updated link, but everything is more or less the same. Maybe just a few screenshots may have been updated, things like that. But this is kind of a repository of, just information. It's not really a, an actual presentation. It's more of just, a data dump of stuff. So you can see it's 170 slides. So we'll go through some of this stuff today, and then otherwise you'll also have this at your disposal to refer back to when you have questions. It kind of outlines everything from start to finish that you would need to do. Again, this is kind of a catch-all, so there's probably some stuff in here that doesn't relate to you, just because it's kind of, it's kind of designed so that it can kind of help everybody. So anything that doesn't relate to you, just ignore. But this is kind of a good, place that if you ever have questions, you can refer to this. And if you don't see that, then you can reach out to me. Okay, so so I guess my first question is for flight planning. Are you planning on using UGCS?
I mean, I have used Mission Planner previously, but I'm just flying a 3DR solo up until this point. I mean, I haven't used any other flight planning software. Looking at the video, it looks like it's pretty similar.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the flight planning softwares are based off of the same kind of source code.
Sure.
And then it's just kind of figuring out which features do what and where the buttons are and things like that. So we like UGCS just because it's relatively user friendly. It's easy to pick up. There's a lot of documentation from their website. They have YouTube videos and things like that. So that's kind of what we usually use and recommend. But you can kind of use other programs that work for you. I think the BFT folks probably are going to recommend Q Ground Control, which will work fine as well. So it's kind of up to you and what works best for your workflow. So I guess
sorry,
the first thing is go ahead.
Yeah, is that Q as the letter or cube?
Yep,
as like
the Q is in the letter. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And that is I believe that's an open source free software. It's a little clunky as you get with any kind of free open source software, but it more or less does the job. So I kind of like UGCS because it's a little more cleaned up, but it's up to you to kind of do whatever you're happy and comfortable with. So I guess if you're interested in UGCS and that's what you think you might use, I could do usually I kind of start with the flight planning, so I could go through that, or at least give you a high over level of that, so you can kind of see what we do with that.
I think I would like to go over that. The
Sure.
UGCS.
Okay. So I think instead of going through the slides, it might be better to just do a quick live demo. So let me launch the software here. Okay, so UGCS stands for Universal Ground Control Software. They're based out of, I believe, Latvia. So they are very responsive and helpful, just with the caveat that because they're in Latvia, there's a big time change. So if you have a question at, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're not going to get back to you because it's midnight their time, and they'll probably respond the next day. So if you ever have any questions, I think you can just email them, support@ugcs.com. And so anything that is not really, trivial that, I don't go over here, I would just, defer you to them because, like I said, they're the experts and they'd have kind of the, any error messages, they'd know how to troubleshoot and things like that. Okay, so let me remove this. Okay, so here is our headquarters in Massachusetts here at Headwall Photonics in Bolton. First thing that you are going to do is go to this menu and main menu. I think actually the first time you install the software, it is going to automatically pop up with this license tab, and it'll be like a yellow box, and you just pop in that that key that we provided, and then that is good for a year from the first activation. So you can see here it says support and updates till blah, blah, blah. So for mine, I have 215 days left. Once you first activate it, you'll have the full year. And then, like I said earlier, after the year, you don't have to pay to update anything, but if you want to continue to get the access to the latest updates and their support, you need to pay, I think, a maintenance fee of like $130 or something a year, something around those lines. Which it's not a lot of money, so I recommend that just because I always like having the latest version of their stuff. They come out with updates, a couple times a year, and also it's just for flight planning stuff. It seems to always be best to have on the latest version so that you don't have any incompatibilities between the version on the tablet and the version on the computer, and then the whatever drone it's working with. So I kind of recommend using the latest version if you can. And so that license is good for 2 activations, so you can put it on 2 different computers. The one good thing about that also is that you see there's this deactivate button, so you can activate it and deactivate it as needed. So if you say, oh, I got a new computer, I want to move it to that one, just go in, deactivate, and then activate it on the other one. Or even if you had 3 users and you kind of wanted to hop around between user to user, you could have it activated on any 2 machines at once, but you can kind of manage that however you'd like. You don't need any license to download the software and to mess around with it. You only need it for actually uploading any missions. So anybody who wants to build a flight plan or mess around or learn, you can just go to their website and download the software. And even without a license, you should be okay to use that. So first thing, pop in your license, get yourself activated. And then what we want to do is we want to go to our payload section, and we're going to do create new. And then you're going to add in your sensor here. So you say create new. You're going to add in all these things. Let me just show you what they should look like. So you basically just create this 12mm nano with all these settings. So since you have the co-aligned, the UAV is only going to consider it as one sensor, so you only need to build the one payload here. So you could do the nano or the SWIR. I just recommend doing the nano because it's right here and easy. All this info should also be in the slide deck as well, so you don't need to write it down if you don't have pen and paper or anything right now. So from there, you would then go to vehicles, profiles. And this is where you might need to get a little bit of help from BFD just to make sure you get this all set up correctly. So typically you just find whatever UAV is already pre-imported here. So normally we're using the M600, and I would add in that payload to the M600. But since you're using the SE8, which is not a pre-populated UAV here, I think you would go, let's see if I can remember where I, yeah, so I had to create this profile here. So I just went to this ArduPilot, and then it is a hexcopter. So I kind of found the one that seemed, or a quadcopter. So I figured this one is kind of the most like it. And then I added the 12mm nano to that copter. And then I went through and checked that all these seem reasonable. I think might be good to double check with BFD that all these settings and everything work and are, they don't have any other recommendations for things to change, but this should all be good for you.
Sure. Yeah. Could you share that to me, or that's not going to be in the whenever you have time?
Let me just take a screenshot right now, and then I'll send it to you after.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'll get that all to you later. Okay, so also in here, there's a bunch of, settings and things like that to be aware of. Typically, I say don't change things from their defaults unless you know what you're changing or have a good reason to. Like for example, this fence radius, I think usually it's defaulted to like 500 meters, which means you wouldn't be able to create a mission that goes more than 500 meters away from your takeoff. And so, you'd want to check what is the range of the RC and things like that, and then you could adjust this, depending on whatever is safe. But other things such as how fast you go up and down, things like that. So this is where all that kind of stuff lives. So just know that that's here, and if you have anything you're saying, oh, I wish I could go a little higher or something like that without it locking you out, that's where you could change this max altitude, things like that. So just be aware that a bunch of that stuff's in the settings. At the end, make sure you click save if you make any changes, and then we can go back to the main view here. Okay, so bottom left here is a little compass. If you click that, it'll orient you north-south. The left click is you can drag around. A right click changes your orientation or perspective. And then the mouse wheel or control plus and minus will zoom in and out. So we'll zoom in over here. Okay, so here's where we're gonna build a flight plan for today. So how UGCS works is there are missions and routes. So the whole mission is under this name, or I guess whatever you end up saving it. So we'll just say demo. And the mission can include multiple different routes. So for example, you have cornfield 1, cornfield 2, cornfield 3. You have a mission that can encompass all those different flights. So you can kind of have just one file that you say, fly the first one, fly the second one, fly the third one. So we're going to now create a route. So we go add new route. We're going to create from scratch, give it a name. Going to find that, let's see. Find that UAV, say next. All this stuff we pretty much want to keep at the defaults. You want to make sure that this return to home altitude is a safe height. You can see kind of the schematic here that I'm pretty sure how the SE8 works is it's going to go up to whatever this predetermined altitude is, and then over and then down in any sort of emergency situation. So you want to make sure that this is not, you don't want this to be a huge number, because then it's going to waste all that time and battery going all the way up and then have to come all the way back down. So if you say, oh, well, the highest tree or highest building or highest telephone pole or whatever is 40 meters, we'll set this to 50 meters so that if we lose connection to the RC or something like that, it's going to follow a safe pattern. It's not going to run into anything. So this would be something that you would set based on wherever you're located and what is safe for that area. Then here, this is the maximum altitude above ground. So as you know, in the US, 120 meters is the legal limit. You just want to be careful because I think that number is counted from wherever you take off. So if you take off, that's the 0 point. And then say you're flying up a hill or a mountain or something, even if you're only 60 meters above the ground, but if you go more than 120, or in this case 130 above that takeoff location, then it won't let you do that. So just keep that in mind, that if you ever get kind of an altitude warning, you'd want to change this maximum altitude above ground. And you might also need to change it in that last UAV settings area as well. Everything else I recommend keeping as is, and we'll say okay. Then you see this toolbar shows up on the left here. We're going to mostly be working on the photogrammetry tool. So we'll click on that, and then we're going to drop in our waypoints. So we're going to double click, and this is going to be the corners of our AOI. And then once you're happy, click enter, and it'll close that figure. And then it's going to take in whatever these values are, and then fill in so that you're covering that full lower yellow box with flight lines. I'm getting some of these warnings here, and that's okay. we're going to click this little trash can icon to remove the action. So anything that says the word action, you can basically ignore or not worry about. So the UAV and the sensor are obviously physically mounted together, but they're not actually communicating back and forth. So what an action would be was like, say if you're using a Phantom and you wanted to trigger it to take a picture every 3 seconds or every 10 meters or something like that. So the action would be, trigger. Whereas here we're not doing any communication back and forth. So anything that says the word action, we don't really care about. Okay, so first thing here is I'm noticing I'm starting over here at waypoint 1 and ending over here at waypoint 31. So I always recommend making even number of flight lines, because in this case, we're gonna take off over around here. We're gonna have to fly all the way through our area of interest to get to this far point. So if we make even numbers, we're gonna start and end on the same side, and that way we don't enter our area of interest and fly over it and get data that we don't really want. So in this case, either I would wanna make my box a little smaller or a little bigger. So let's try going a little smaller. And now we're starting and stopping on the same side. If you hover over it, it's going to tell you the AGL altitude. So in this case, 59.8, which is good. And that is calculated based on this ground resolution, GSD. So how the photogrammetry tool works is you give it a desired pixel size, and then it'll say, based on the camera and the desired pixel size, you need to fly at X height. So in this case, I was trying to fly at 60 meters, so I kind of back calculated to figure out what height I need to be, or what resolution I need to be at 60 meters. Conversely, if you said, oh, I want 3 centimeter pixels, I could change that, and then it would adjust my flight accordingly. And now to get 3 centimeter pixels, I need to fly at 49 meters. Okay, so we're gonna kind of work our way top down here. So each point in this photogrammetry box has a latitude and longitude. You can see there's number 1 of 4. That's the 4 corners that I dropped in. You can see I can kind of change which one I'm looking at. So if you had a field and you knew exactly the coordinates of the corners or something like that, and you wanted to pop that in, you could just type in exactly whatever you wanted here for each one. Again, you can also always, drag it around however you want. You can drag the whole thing. If you can highlight that center thing. You can orient it, different ways.
Excuse me. Can you import shape files?
I don't believe you can import shape files, but you can import KMLs.
Okay.
That might be a question for them. They might have that ability, or else if not, they're always looking for recommendations. So that could be something that you could, request, and they might look to add that in. But yeah, KMLs you can.
Either one works. That's good. Thanks.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, so next thing is the flight speed. So that's actually the only setting that we don't really adjust ahead of time, because that is dependent on the lighting conditions. So usually I'll just leave it at the default 5 or whatever. And then that's the last thing that we would adjust before uploading it to the UAV. Next thing is the turn type. So we have the options of spline or straight. For the GPS inside of the system, the spline turns are better. That's kind of a more rounded, less abrupt turn. The GPS has what's called a Kalman filter on the inside of it, which is essentially using its previous position to try and predict where it's about to be. And so anything that is kind of abrupt or quick, it takes some amount of time for it to kind of figure out that it's made that turn. So anything that is more rounded and less abrupt is better. So we like these spline turns. Camera, it's already chose that 12mm nano because that was associated with that UAV. I also look like I have a different sensor in here that I could have chosen as well. You should only have that one unless you're building in multiple different sensors and things like that. So just make sure if you have multiple, you select the right one, because that's what dictates the pixel sizes and things like that. We just talked about the GSD and then overlap. So with the line scanning systems that we have here, we don't use or need any forward overlap. So we set it to the minimum value, which it'll allow, which is 1%. But we do want side overlap, and we recommend 40%. We're not doing any sort of like averaging or combining or anything like that of the multiple pixels. It's more just we want to make sure that we don't miss any data, and so we've kind of found that you definitely don't need more than 40%, but you also don't want to go too much lower than that, just in case you get a big gust of wind or something like that. You want to make sure that you don't have any gaps if there's any sort of windy conditions or things like that, if it gets blown around a little bit. With a gimbal, you probably could go down a little bit, maybe like 30%. It's kind of up to you. We kind of recommend just keeping it at 40, and that seems to be good. Camera top facing forward, leave that checked. It's just kind of saying what is the orientation of the camera. Direction angle, I was showing you that a little bit earlier. That is the orientation based off of north-south. So this parking lot is not directly north-south. So we needed to change the orientation a little bit so that we are flying in the direction we want. We do always recommend whenever possible to fly in a cardinal direction, so either north-south or east-west. In this example, we're not, because we're trying to line up with the parking lot lines. But if you're flying over a field or something, whenever you can, it's best to fly in a cardinal direction, because that will minimize the end data size. So we'll see this a little bit later, but when you go to do your ortho rectification, with all of the data you took here, it's going to create a grid that kind of looks like this, and all these corner areas, which complete the rectangle, are going to just be basically null data that are going to make the image bigger but not have any useful spectral information. So just best practices, or a way to save some download and upload and processing time, is to fly in a cardinal direction whenever you can. Okay, next is here. Avoid obstacles. So there's no, I'm not sure actually about if there's any collision avoidance features on the SC8. That would be a question for BFD, and I'm not sure. So usually what this actually is you can build in your own obstacles into the software. So for example, like I know this over here is like a cell tower or some sort of tower. And so I could, put in a physical obstacle here that would say, don't allow, anything within, say 30 meters of this point that is, 100 feet high or something like that. And that way, if I tried to build a flight plan that intersected with that, it would say, nope, you're going to run into an obstacle. So that's what that would be. I typically I leave it checked, but I don't usually use that feature. I instead will just, do a visual check of the scene ahead of time, or fly with a, Phantom or a small drone to, kind of see how the area is looking, see what's my tallest thing in the area, things like that. Okay, action execution. Again, anything that says the word action, we ignore, we don't really care about. Additional waypoints, kind of a weird feature, but usually we don't use it. You can see if I click it, it's going to add in a bunch more points, which you'd think would be good, except for the fact that I think a lot of these systems can only take in a certain number of waypoints that they can hold in memory. So I know with the DJI products, it's 99. I'm not sure with the SE8, it might be more like 300 or 400. So that might be helpful. But if you have a waypoint every couple meters over a large field, you're going to eat that up really quickly. So usually we don't need this checkbox. Next is overshoot. So there's two ways to do this. It's either you add in overshoot by having a number here, and you can see it added 20 meters on either side of every flight line. Or if you are waypoint restrained, you could set that to 0 and then just physically drag your box to be bigger. But we always want to make sure that we're executing our turns outside of our area of interest so that we're not taking data when we're doing the turns. So we recommend, about 15 to 20 meters of overshoot, and that you should be good with that. Overshoot speed, just leave it at 0 or blank, and it'll take in whatever the flight speed is. It doesn't really help to speed up or slow down during the turns. It's more of a battery killer to change the speed like that. So I recommend just keeping it at whatever it is. Maybe if it, you're flying really slow and you wanted to turn around a little bit faster, maybe that'd be okay, but in general, just leave it at blank. Allow partial calculation. I'm not exactly sure what this one is. I think what it is if you had a big mission and you, had more than that number of waypoints that the UAV could take in, you could allow partial calculation, and that way you could upload, the first X amount of waypoints from the mission instead of being able to upload the whole thing. Altitude mode, so this is important, and this is actually one of the main reasons why we use and recommend UGCS is it allows for terrain following. So it has a elevation model built in, one of the SRTM missions, an elevation model built from that. So it's a very coarse, I think 30-meter grid DEM of the world, but it will, you can kind of see it's kind of going up and down a little bit with the elevation. You can tell it thinks that there's a change in elevation between this point and this point, so it added one in here. You can also, another good feature of this software is you can add in your own elevation model. So if you go to this map options, map layers, you can add in your own visual map, or you can also add in your own elevation map. So for example here, this SRTM is the top one, so that's what I'm using. But if I click on this one, this is a one that I generated from a LiDAR flight, and you can see if I'm within this shaded green area, now it would use that elevation model, which would be much higher resolution than the the 10 or 30 grid that the SRTM one has. Just be careful if you're ever using your own elevation, just that you don't want to span from one to the next. So if you kind of zoom in over here, let's see if it's tell. Oh, that's why. There, now I'm using that. You can see it'll take whichever one is the highest on the list. So because there is some sort of change in the datum between the one that I have, which you can see all the relief from the trees, and this one, you don't want to span from one to the next because there's this imaginary cliff that it'll get really confused by. So if you're ever flying with your own elevation model, just make sure that you're not spanning from one down to the next. And you can see here, now if we look back at the mission, now you can see, oh, it's going up and over this tree and things like that, because it has all of the, these cars in the parking lot from when the DEM was made and things like that. So I'm gonna go back for a second.
Charles, does it matter what file format these DEMs are in?
It does. I think there's 3 or 4 different kinds, and I don't know those off the top of my head, but I think there is something on their website which says which are acceptable. I mean, any TIFF file should be fine, and I forget which other ones they can take in, but there's a couple different types, yeah.
So it sounds like the fine scale local DM may actually cause trouble by making it go up and down over trees or cars that used to be there, and a smooth one might be better to get a more consistent pixel size.
Yeah, so it's kind of up to you. So if we go back, for a second here. So what I kind of recommend, so this bottom thing, this AGL tolerance, So that's a way that you can kind of make your elevation coarser or less coarse. So for the SRTM DEM, it's already very coarse, so I brought this AGL tolerance down, to 0. Whereas in the opposite, if I'm using this guy, and now you see like I'm going, a little bit too jaggedy over this tree and things like that. Maybe what I would want to do is I'd want to make this a higher number, like 6 maybe, and that would kind of smooth it back out a little bit. So you can kind of mess around with both ways and see what's best for your your situation. Maybe try 3. But yeah, I mean, you always just want to be the most consistently above the terrain as possible. So in most situations, the generic SRTM DEM is good, but if you are in places with high relief or kind of a hilly terrain or anything like that, or for example, like I've done missions in mines where the ground has physically changed since when the DEM was generated. So in that case, then I imported my own and use it this way. But it's kind of up to you and the location to figure out what's the best course of action for that area. So yeah. Typically if you're flying over relatively flat areas, fields or rivers, or in this case a parking lot, this is it's fine enough to use the SRTM DEM. But yeah. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, so the 2 modes are out AGL, or actually there's a third one, AGL, AMSL, or this rangefinder. I don't know what that rangefinder is, but AMSL is basically you have a constant height above sea level. So in this case, it would take in whatever, probably I think from the first point, make it, you're going to be at a height of 60.2 meters above that first point, and then everything is going to be the same. It's not going to take in the elevation data. So we always want to be in AGL. And then I was talking about this AGL tolerance. For the SRTM DEMs, I recommend kind of, going towards the lower limit. So in this case, you can see by going from 3 to 0, it's how closely does it follow that elevation model, and then it added in a few points because it recognized that there's a small little hill over here, and so between here and here there's relief of more than 0 meters, and so it said, okay, I'm going to add in a few different points so that I can more accurately follow that terrain. No actions at last point. Again, we don't care about actions. And then double grid, we don't care about that for hyperspectral. So turn that off. Okay, next thing we're gonna do is this add first waypoint button. So I'm not sure about the SE8, but with a lot of the other UAVs I've used, there's some built-in safety features that won't allow you to have the first waypoint more than 30 meters away from your takeoff location. So in this case, I'd want to build in, where my first point is. And that way now it's going to fly here and then fly here and then do the ladder pattern. And then kind of conversely, you can add one at the end if you'd like as well. You always want to make sure you're adding after whichever is here. So I'm going to click on this waypoint, and then now I'm going to be adding after that last point, and it'll bring me back over here. So that is the flight planning part of it. The second kind of thing to be aware of is the polygon, so whatever the sensor is going to use to trigger. And so you can create that polygon, it can be a text or a KML file. You can create it in Google Earth. You can create it we have an online polygon tool, but I actually really like using UGCS for that as well, because it's much easier to overlay the flight plan and that polygon tool at the same time. So I'm going to click Add New Route. Name it Polygon. So we're not actually going to do a flight with this. This is only going to be for the information of where the waypoints are. So you can click whatever UAV you want. We'll just click the SE8 again. Next, okay. And this time we're going to use the perimeter tool. And so now you can see we have two routes. We have our first one, and then we have our polygon. The polygon doesn't have anything in it. You can see this one turn kind of bluish because it's in the background now. And so for the polygon, we're going to go to our perimeter, and we're going to drop in our box. And then again, hit enter when you're happy. And now I have this flight plan, which I can export as a KML. So I have the information of where these points are. And so now anytime that if I load this KML file to the sensor, anytime I'm within this box, whenever the GPS says, oh yes, I'm inside of that area of interest, I'm going to turn on capture, and anytime I'm outside, I will pause capture. So in this case, it would be off, 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 and then when it hits here, it's going to collect until it gets to here, and then it's going to pause while it does the turn. And so you want to kind of line up your polygon with where your overshoot starts and stops. That's pretty good. And then you also want to make sure that your polygon is a little bit wider than your flight plan, because the GPS on the UAV is not as super high grade. So you tell it to fly this line, and it could be a meter to the left or a foot to the right or whatever. So you just want to make sure that you have a little bit of a buffer on the sides so that you don't accidentally, if this was right here and then you flew, just over this side, you wouldn't get this first pass of data. So I always like to make sure that this is a little bit wider. And once you're happy with your polygon, you go to parameters and export to KML. You want to export it as a line string, and then give it a unique name or a location and save it. And when you're done with your mission, you go File, Export Mission, and it'll save as whatever this name is unless you change it. And then you should be good to use that when you're ready to fly. Okay, so I think that is most of it for the UGCS stuff. Any questions on any of that?
So it automatically decides when to snap the photos based on the camera specs and the flight height and the amount of overlap and things like that.
Sorry, I missed that first part. What'd you say?
As it's moving along the flight line, it crosses into the polygon. After that, it takes images at a frequency just based on its calculations of the correct amount of overlap in the footprint, I suppose. So you don't have to control anything about when the actual camera is triggered.
Yeah, so and we'll go into some of that setup, the acquisition setup next. But basically, you figure out all the parameters on the ground, and then you load in this polygon, and then once it enters, it will collect frames continuously from here to here at whatever rate you told it to, and then it will pause when it's outside of, when it's doing its turn, and then it'll start again here, and pause here, and so on and so forth. But yes, you're correct.
This works with the Xfold also?
Yes, it should. Again, you'd have to probably, check with them a little bit, but we were able, I'm pretty sure, it's been a little while, but I'm pretty sure we were able to fly the Xfold with UGCS as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so that is flight planning. Let's go back to our PowerPoint here. Some of these screenshots, they come out with, new versions pretty regularly. So I think they're up to, let's see, version 4.6 now, and this is 3.7. So some of these screenshots are slightly out of date, but everything is, all the information's relatively the same. They keep adding, different features for LiDAR and things like that, which are not really relative to what we're doing. So the buttons may be in different spots, but all the info is, the same, more or less. Okay. Okay, I can't remember. Did you guys purchase a base station with your system? I'll take your silence as you don't know or no.
We did. I believe we did. Yes, we did. With the Expo.
Okay, so it was, if you purchase it from us, it would look like this guy, the SPS 585. So how it works is the UAV is the rover, and then it needs a base so that it can do its all of its calculations on where the corrected trajectory was and all that kind of stuff. So the base, you will set this up before the flight. It needs to be logging for at least 15 to 20 minutes before and 15 to 20 minutes after. If you don't have one of these, or you don't have it on that specific day, that's okay. There is a network of CORS stations, continuously operating reference stations, that are hosted by the government. You just have to make sure that there's a station near enough to you. So anywhere in the US, in the continental US, you should be fine. If you were to take this into the jungle in South America or something, you might want to check ahead of time or make sure you bring the base station with you. So basically, yeah, set this up a little bit before and leave it running a little bit after. And what it's going to do is it's just going to continuously collect its GPS location, and then over time it's going to have an average and know exactly where it was, and then it uses that known location with the location from the raw GPS files, and then it does some corrections to say I know exactly where I was based on all that data. If you do end up ever using the CORS network, just be aware that one of the downfalls of that is you can't process the data that same day. They only get updated, I believe, overnight or once every 24 hours or something. So if you take data, you can't process it until the following day, or maybe even the day after that. Yeah, I think it's usually the following day though. Okay. So this is just some basic slides on how to set it up. It's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm gonna skip through that right now. But you just, like I said, make sure you wanna have it logging before and after and during the flight. Okay, so HyperSpec 3, so our software, we have two primary softwares. We have HyperSpec 3 and we have SpectralView. HyperSpec 3 is our acquisition software, which you'll use to set up your flight and perform the actual mission. And then SpectralView is what you'll use for your data processing afterwards. So the first thing obviously is to install and set up the software. So we provided you guys with that flash drive that came with the system, or the link I sent yesterday to Andy, this, the configuration file. So within that was the sensor config folder. So if you install everything correctly, it should place all the files where they're supposed to go, and you should be good to go. And if not, I can help you, make sure that everything's set up correctly. But once you install the software, you'll need to request a license from me. So you go to SpectralView and then click File and then License Request. And then you'll generate this .req file, save it somewhere local, and then send that to me, preferably via our ticketing system on our website. So I'll just show you that quickly. If you go to our website and then support, there is the ticketing system dropdown, and then you can open a new ticket here and then send that file to me through that. That way, just if if I'm out sick or if I'm traveling, working with a different customer and I don't get to it, then that way somebody else will, but it'll usually be me getting back to you. And that also, helps us keep a record of things. So yeah, anything that is any support related questions, I recommend that you reach out to us through this ticketing system, and that way we'll make sure it gets to the correct person who can help you. Also on our website here, there's, which I'm sure you guys may have already found, but there's this training tab, which has a bunch of helpful videos, which it sounds like you guys may have already watched some or all of them. And I know, these are all primarily for the M600, but anything related to the sensor would be the same. So, they should still be relevant and helpful for you guys as well. And then once you send me this .req file, I will send you back a license file, and you put it in your C Headwall license directory, and then you should be good. Again, that's a perpetual license, so you don't ever need to get an update or anything like that, unless you wanted to pay for updates after your 1 year support. But it'll last forever. One thing I want to always point out is that you need to make sure you change your IP so that you can correctly communicate with the system. So you're going to go into your Ethernet, your network and settings, and then Ethernet, and then your IPv4, and then you're going to use, instead of obtain IP automatically, you're going to use the following IP of 10.0.65.5 with a subnet mask of 255.0.0.0. This just kind of allows the sensor to talk correctly through that Ethernet port. And so if you're ever having connection problems, one thing I always recommend is that you check that this didn't get automatically or accidentally changed back to its defaults, or somebody changed it to a different IP or something. That's always kind of a first line of attack of where to look if you're having connection problems. Okay, I'm going to skip these because these are related to the M600. These will be some questions that you might have for the BFD folks, if they have any IMU or compass calibrations that they recommend. I think they usually recommend that you don't do any sort of calibration unless it prompts you to. They do it all at their shop before it gets shipped. So I think anything should be all set unless it's saying compass calibration needed or something like that. But it would be a good question to ask them. There is a magnetometer calibration though for the GPS in the coal line. So this has already been done once, at least for your system, while it was at Headwall. But it says it's kind of an optional calibration. It's recommended anytime you're flying in a new geographic location or a new magnetic environment. So anytime, my recommendation is anytime you move more than 50 miles or something like that, or you're flying in somewhere where the ground has significantly changed. Like for example, if you're going to go fly in a mine or something like that, where there's a bunch of different rocks and things like that. So what that would be is you'd let the system be powered on, sit on the ground for 1 minute, and then take off. And then once you're in the air, you're going to rotate clockwise and then counterclockwise, or I guess 3 full rotations in each direction, with each rotation taking at least 10 seconds. You're going to rotate 3 full times and then rotate the opposite way 3 full times. And then you should be all set there. Okay, into HyperSpec 3. So let me jump forward for a second here. Okay, so here's kind of a diagram of what the coal line looks like. So instead of the M600, you'd have the SE8. But so on the UAV, you have your antenna and your power coming out. Inside of the coal line, you obviously have your VNIR and your SWIR. The LiDAR you guys don't have a LiDAR, so you would ignore that part. The Applanix is on the SWIR side, but it is giving data to both the VNIR and the SWIR, and then the HyperCore is the computer for the SWIR. So you have your computer, and then you're going to need to connect the Ethernet switch, because there's the 2 Ethernet ports on the coal line. So the Ethernet switch gets powered by USB, and so then you have laptop into the switch with an Ethernet cable, and then 2 Ethernet cables from the switch, one into the V-near, one into the sphere, and that's how you can talk to both sensors at the same time. To connect to the GPS, if you want to check that that calibration took, or if you want to download your GPS data after the mission, you're going to go to this 10.0.65.51:8080 while you're connected to the SWIR port, and that's how you would download that data. Okay, so in HyperSpec 3, there'll be, you'll first notice this sensor tab. It's a sensor dropdown, and you'll see something like HC for the hypercore, and then you'll see, if you click the down arrow, there'll be one for nano for the V-near. And so when you're setting up the co-aligned, what you're going to do is you're going to consider it as 2 separate instruments that you have to set up. So you're going to open up the live video on the nano, and then you're going to open up the live video on the shortwave. And so you'll have these 2 separate plots. They'll look pretty much the same, with the exception that the shortwave has a gain level of high and low. We recommend high gain for anything remote sensing based, just because otherwise with low gain, you would have to fly much higher and slower. So even though high gain, you sacrifice a little bit of signal to noise, it's much more reasonable to use high gain for anything remote sensing based. So right here, this image was taken either with the lens cap on or while I was inside, because clearly it's just flat here. So let me go back for a second here, and you'll see. Okay, so here is what an example of the nano live video would look like. So you have spectral and spatial. This is the nano is a 12-bit sensor, so it would max out at 4096. So you can see this plot is up until about 4096. So if you were saturated, you'd have kind of a flat line at the top here. And basically what we're looking at is this bell curve and the max position of the bell curve. So if you click this X hair button, you would see a crosshair of which pixel you are looking at. You want to make sure you're not in one of these darker regions, like this kind of line right here. That's the oxygen A band, which is an absorption region. So you want to make sure that you're not looking specifically in there. So you just want to click, and make sure you're looking at somewhere that's kind of more uniform. From there, then you want to make sure that the system is looking at a white reference. Doesn't need to be any sort of, calibrated white reference. You could use SpectralOn, although usually I recommend people not using SpectralOn in the field because it'll get dirty or, banged around, and those are expensive pieces of equipment. So, usually I say, we provide a little piece of plastic that you can use, or, a lot of times I'll use like a PVC board from Home Depot, or even in a pinch, you can use like a white piece of paper, anything that's spectrally diffuse and not really like speckly. So you'll have the sensor looking at your white object, and you want it to be fully illuminated by the sun. So you want to kind of orient the sensor towards the sun. If needed, you might need to have a second person, kind of tilt the UAV a little bit so that you can, get out of any shadows or anything like that. But yeah, once you're looking at your white area, then you're going to adjust your exposure value. So in this case, this 3.5 value, until this curve is about 90% of saturation. So once it's somewhere between 37 and 3900 counts, if you hover over this, it'll tell you what number it is. You can see here 4,000, so we're at, in this case, probably 3,800, which is good. You want to adjust your exposure until you're at that value, and that way you're, you won't be saturating if you see anything because the thought is that that white thing is brighter than anything you'll see in the scene, and so you're not going to see anything brighter to overexpose and saturate. Once you've set your exposure, then you need to set your frame period. So the rule is that the frame period needs to be greater than or equal to the exposure, and so you would want to make it. So in this case, you would start by saying, okay, let's set it to 3.5. But then you can see this note right here that the frame period should always be at least 5 milliseconds. So then you would set it up to 5. And then in that case, you'd say, okay, so with a frame period of 5 and an altitude of distance to object of 60, it would say my suggested speed is like 11 or 12 meters per second. And in that case, then I'd say, okay, well, that's maybe a little bit faster than I'd like to fly. So then I'll increase my frame period a little more, in this case up to 10, and then it's saying fly at 5.55 meters per second, which is a little more reasonable. So the frame period and the altitude dictate your speed. And so if you fly higher, you can fly faster. If you fly lower, you have to fly slower. So there's kind of a couple different trade-offs. And then also the frame period, the longer the frame period, the slower you fly. So that is for the Veneer. You do the same thing for the SWIR. The curve is going to look a little bit different because there's a couple more absorption period spots in the shortwave. So it's going to be a little more jaggedy, specifically on this bottom side. But the idea is the same, that you want the peak to be at about 90% of saturation. Although the SWIR is I think it's a 16-bit instead of a 12-bit. So it's going to be saturated at, I think 60-something thousand counts. And so in this case, you'd want to set your SWIR to 55,000 instead of 3,900. And same thing, the frame period must be greater than or equal to the exposure. And also then the follow-up to that is that because the frame period dictates your speed and you can only fly at one speed, you have to set your frame period to be equal on both sides. So in this case, I determined I wanted to have 10. I would have to make sure that on my SWIR side, I have 10 as well. Next tab is this Nano GPS tab. So we're kind of working our way down. And so you'll see values for altitude, latitude, longitude, roll, pitch, and yaw, date and time, things like that. You see this little X white cross mark that's showing where you're physically located. So you then want to click this import polygon file, and you're going to load in that KML file that we generated from UGCS or from wherever we made that KML file. And then you can see, okay, here's my area of interest, here's where I am. That makes sense. They're near each other. I'm oriented to the north of it, blah, blah, blah. You just want to make sure that it's not like super zoomed out or super small or something, because then in that case, maybe you accidentally flip the latitude and longitude in your KML, or instead of a negative, you have a west or an east or something like that, and all of a sudden your coordinates are flip-flopped and you're in the middle of the Indian Ocean or something like that. So you want to make sure that this little dot corresponds to where your polygon is, and it all makes sense. And again, we're going to do everything on both sides. So you load it into your Nano, and then you click the drop down, open up the SWIR side, and then load it into your SWIR as well. At this point, you're ready to take your dark reference. So we're going to open up the capture tab. And let's see, do I have? Here's what I was saying, you have to do it on both sides. Okay, capture tab. So for the co-aligned, this is actually the only tab that you have to only click it on one side because it has integrated both. So you'll click the capture, and then you see it says Nano and Hypercore. So you'll give it a name, whatever you want to name, Cornfield 1 or something like that. It'll be appended with, it'll add in before the file name, when it's actually created, a string of numbers like 00015 or something, which means that that's the 15th data set that it will have stored on it. And then it'll say corn 1 or whatever you tell it in this folder prefix, and then it'll be at the end it'll attach the timestamp. So it'll say, you know, 02152022 or something like that. And I think it might have the time as well. So we have frames per cube and max number of cubes here. So what the frames per cube is how many lines are going to be collected before it writes the file. So in this case, and what we recommend is 2000. That gives us reasonable file sizes of about 0.5 gigabyte per file. If you make it bigger than that, then you're going to have larger files which are harder to work with. And if you make it smaller than that, then you're going to have a lot more files. So we've kind of found that this 2000 is that good middle ground. Max number of cubes, 0 means infinity. So that means we're not going to limit the number that we take in. So if we wanted to only collect 10 cubes, we could put 10 here, and then it would stop once it got to that. But for remote sensing, there's not really a good reason to modify that number. And then you can see the exposure and frame period. Those automatically get pulled in from the live video tab from what we already predetermined. So we're going to do our dark reference now. And we would click this. I think this is an outdated screenshot. I think it just says dark reference now or something. But you'd click this checkbox. Let's see, I think this one's more up to date. Yeah, collect dark. And it'll add whatever after whatever name you give it, it'll add _dark to the end. And then what it's going to do is internally, it's going to ignore this 2000 and replace it with a 1001. And so then it'll take 1000 frames in 1 cube of the inside of your lens cap. So when you click go, it's going to say, is the lens cap on? And then you'll either put the lens cap on or confirm, and then it'll start. And then it's going to take, in this example, it would take 10 seconds because it's 10 milliseconds times 1000 frames. So take 10 seconds. And then at the end, so you click go, it would do its thing. And then the stop icon would be illuminated. And then once it finished, the go icon would pop back up. So once you've done your dark, then you can remove your lens cap. And then click this enable GPS triggering box. And what that'll do, basically there's 2 modes for the sensor, either continuously capturing, which is not really good for what we want to be doing for remote sensing stuff, or enable GPS triggering. And then that enable GPS triggering means it'll only collect when it's inside of that polygon box that we define for it. So we want to click this checkbox and then click go. And then as soon as the acquisition is started, you'll see a little pause icon show up over here. Assuming you're outside of your area of interest. If you're inside of the area of interest, I think it'll just show the play icon and it'll start recording. It's always recommended that you start your acquisition outside of the polygon and then you fly into it to begin. So at this point, you would, once you see the pause icon, you would then close out of your HyperSpec 3 software, and then you could disconnect the Ethernet cables from the system. And then at that point, you are ready to put your UAV out in its takeoff location. Make sure you upload the flight plan from UGCS to the drone. And then at that point, you are ready to do your mission. So you take off, and before you click enable the mission, you would want to do a GPS initialization. So anytime that the system's power cycled, you should do this. And it's just basically flying in one direction as fast as you can for about 10 seconds or 100 meters, coming to a complete stop, and then flying backwards for 10 seconds or 100 meters back to your takeoff, or not your takeoff, but back to your original position. Make sure that's all done at a safe altitude above any trees or anything. And then at that point, you would want to fly towards your first waypoint, orient yourself in the direction of the flight, and then you would engage the mission, and then it would be on autonomous control until you finish. And so you do that ladder pattern, and then once you are done, you would then, I think you flip it out of the manual mode and then back into, or out of the mission mode and back into the mode that you can control it. And then at that point, you would actually want to do that initialization at the end as well, because there's some forward and reverse smoothing and processing that the post-pack software does. So it's beneficial if you have the battery life to do that down and back at the end as well. And so at that point, you could do that down and back manually, and then land and be ready to stop the acquisition. So you're going to land and then plug back in. And then once you see this, launch the software, once you see this stop icon illuminated, you would click it and that would terminate the mission. At that point, you're ready to do your data download. So again, you're going to download from both sides. So you're going to download from the Nano and download from the Sphere. You want to make sure you select the file and the dark on both sides. Tell it where to save it to. This C Nano Images is the default. I like to do, I'll show you. I like to have this like generic folder that I have named cAVS TBD. So then I'd put whatever my unique file name that I wanted here, and then within that I have a Sphere and a Veneer folder so that I can automatically drop. I can tell it to go directly to those same folders. And then once you select which files you want to download, you would click transfer. This create cube images, you want that to be checked, at least for the Veneer side. And what that's going to do is it's going to automatically take the RG and B bands and generate a PNG so that you can quickly look at the image. There is a bug, and for any Sphere data, it gets confused because there are no RG and B bands, so it just makes it in like a grayscale. Although I think we are coming out with a software, a new version of software in the next month or so that'll have that fixed. So you might want to not do it on the Sphere, and then create those later on in SpectralView. Then the last thing, while you're downloading, you're also going to want to download your TO4 GPS files. So like I said, you can log into the Planix by going to 10.06551:8080 in a browser once you're while you're connected through the Sphere port. And you're going to download, as I'll go through that next, and save somewhere locally. And then you're going to generate an SBET file, which we'll go through in a second here as well. And that SBET file is the smooth best estimate of trajectory. It's the high performance, improved GPS trajectory information. And then you would want to make sure once you generate that, you put it into both sets of data. Okay, so that is the acquisition side of things. Any questions on any of that?
No.
Cool.
I guess I have a small question. Just
Sure.
thinking about collecting it at a few different locations across our facility at BARC. You recommend doing that 100 meters, top speed, back and forth, anytime you power on and off the drone, right? So we put it back in its case and drive to the next field, even if it's, a mile away. You still want to do that each time, right?
Yeah, because so that's because it's a GPS IMU. So there's some little accelerometers in there, and so when they're first powered up, they need a little bit of initialization to kind of figure out where they are and give them some motion and excitement and things like that. So they kind of lose that anytime they're powered off. So yeah, so I mean it's only about a 30-second procedure, but yeah, just do a quick down and back. And then like I said, also if you have battery at the end, it's also beneficial to do that at the end for it helps the processing side of things.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to run and grab a quick drink of water, so I'll be back in 3 or 4 minutes. So I guess we'll take a quick break and then we can get going on some of the processing side of things. So I will be right back.
While we're waiting here, can I ask the rest of you, have you succeeded in installing and running SpectralView software? Because Eric and Jyoti are still having troubles we're trying to overcome in the installation. Andy, Billy, do you have it running yet?
No. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I just left and came back because my mic was not working, so I missed what you said, but I have not installed the software yet.
Okay.
Unfortunately, my son's grandmother on his dad's side passed away, and I had to go to Florida. So I'm in the middle of trying to help him with the estate closure because he's only 19 while trying to do this. So I have not done the software thing yet.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, so we're all on the same page. So we can take the lead in getting an installation up and running. We'll follow up with a support ticket after this meeting.
Yeah, just I guess a little update on that. Eric and I both have tried to install it, and the executable has only about 400 kilobytes as compared to for SpectralView compared to the hyperspec for collection. That one installs fine on my computer and I think on Eric's as well. So every time I try to run it, it gives me a different file that's missing. So we're not quite sure what's going on with that. But I tried to download it twice from the files that Billy posted, and neither was a go.
I got a new copy, I believe, when I asked him to recreate the USB drive that I can't find or didn't receive. I don't think I received it. So I'll take a look at the size of that and see if it's maybe different.
That'd be great.
That would be great. And then if you could post it, we could try that one for the install. That would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll trying to think when I'm going to be into Bark again. I think on Wednesday I will. I could put it on the L drive.
Okay, that's fine. Otherwise, I could give you access to the FTP site and you could just FTP it from home.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, I'll follow up with you and do that.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm back. Any questions to this point, or should I just keep on rolling?
So yeah, I'm sorry, my mic went out. So I have a Reach GPS system, and I'm assuming that I can use that as a base station, or do you know if there's anyone to talk to if I have trouble with that, as opposed to the Trimble?
Yeah, so I've only personally used the Trimble one, but I'm pretty sure anything that can be converted to Rhinex should be
Right.
okay.
Okay.
So what I would say is you should reach out to either, I guess I would say reach out to a Planix tech support and say, hey, I have this base station. Will that work with generating an SBET? And they
I'm
should
sorry,
be able to tell you.
Planix?
A Planix, that's the manufacturer of the GPS.
Okay.
APPLANIX.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I guess next we can talk about some of the GPS stuff. Okay, so I think actually what would be best is here. So yeah, so like I said, you can connect to the GPS by going to 10065. So for you, it'll be this 1006551:8080 in our web browser, and you'll launch up this kind of login page. So your username is going to be admin, and then the password is either going to be password or going to be whatever this 55 number is here. So that's the serial number of that GPS. So they made a change at some point. I don't remember exactly when that propagated through. So either your password will be password or it'll be whatever that serial number is. And you can always just click on this box, it'll make it bigger, and you can highlight and copy and paste that as well. So that's how you log in. To download your data, you'd go to this data logging tab, then the parent directory, and then there's going to be, it'll look kind of like this, but it'll be the number of the month. So you'd go to, for February, you'd go to 02, and then today you'd go to 15, and then it'd open up all the files that were taken for that day. So here you see that it's kind of has a unique file name. So this 55 blah, 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 that's the serial number of the system. And then this specific file was taken on 2017, 11/15 at 1945 UTC time. So each of these files are 3 minutes long. So you can see we have 24, 27, 30, 33, 36, 39, blah, blah, blah. So you want to figure out which files overlap with your flight time. So I recommend doing that by, if you go to your, here, I'll just show you an example. In your data directory, there'll be a file called imugps.txt. And so what I recommend, this file is started as soon as you click the go button. So you want to find this number, which is 1532, and then the last number is 1550. So you want to find the files that encompass between 1532 and 1550 in increments of 3. So you'd either download all the files and then sort them out after, or you would just figure out which ones are in that range and just download the selected files. You do want to be careful though, because this delete selected files is right next to the download selected files. So you don't want to accidentally click that, which I have done before. I believe there is a little like pop-up that says, are you sure you want to delete these? So just, be a little bit careful, because if you delete them, then you can't really get them back. Here, like I said, when you click all the files and then download selected files, a pop-up like this will pop up that says, do you want to download these selected files? So you say, okay. It should just go into your downloads folder. And once it's done, then you can copy those into, I like to put them in like a subfolder that I label APX or GPS or something like that. And then I put that directory in my data directory as well. And so the next thing is, once you have all the GPS files, is to create the SBET through PostPack. So I think maybe I'll do a quick live demo as well for that. Okay, so this is the PostPack software. It is sometimes a little bit of a pain to get licensed. So you'd have to go into, when you download this from their website, there should be this thing called software license utility, which is downloaded alongside it, which I'll show you quickly. And so in here, you would go and you would click activate license and pop in the EID that we gave you, and then you should be all set from there. With a caveat that they've changed some of their licensing over the last year or two. So depending on when your code was generated, it may only be good for version 8.6 or something like that. And so it depends on when your warranty date and things like that is with them. So if you have any issues, just contact their technical support and they can help you get the right version and the right license that you're entitled to. But once you have it licensed, you're going to open it up. You're going to click New Default Project. And then we're going to go Import. And let's find our data here. So I have it in this cAVS 130 BFD folder, and then APX. So one thing that's kind of interesting about this import thing is that so you can select all the files here that you want. See here I have 3, 6, 7 files. Any file that's in that folder, even if I don't select it, it's going to automatically be imported. So that's why you can see I have let's go back one more step. So I have this APX, and then I have this not used folder, which is where if I had any that I didn't want to use, I would sort them out into that folder. And then I also have my base station data in a separate folder here, which I'll download in or import in after. So here now I have these 7 files, which I lined up with based on that IMU GPS text file, so that I know which ones were relevant to the flight. And then I can click import. It's gonna do its thing. And boom, here we are. So you can see this is my pattern over the parking lot. Looks like I did 6 passes. And you can kind of see my down and back from before and after the flight. And then some kind of wonky data from when I was sitting on the ground. So at this point now I can also go back to the import again. And now I'm going to also import the base station. This one I had labeled 01/26/2021. That was probably, I guess, the date that I did this flight. And so now that I have my base and my GPS data, so you have, at this point, you want to go to this little drop down and then find base stations. And then I'm going to right click this and do this compute RTX coordinates. So I'll show you both ways, or at least give you a quick overview of how to do it with using your own base station and with using the CORS network. So if you're using your own base station, you import it like I just showed you. And if you're doing the CORS network, you're going to do this Find Base Stations button, and then it'll pop up. Once this is done, it says horizontal sigma and vertical sigma. Do you accept that? Which is 6 and 10 centimeters, which is good. So I say yes. Okay, so if I wanted to not use, if I didn't have a base station, I wanted to use the CORS network, I'd do this Find Base Stations button. And it's going to look and find all the networks that are within 200 kilometers of me. So you can see I have this one that's 19 kilometers away. This one's at 22, 31, 35. And so I would say do none and then select, the first one. from experience, I know that for some reason this first one always fails here at Headwall, so I think I always have to do this second one. So I'm gonna skip that for now. So I'd say download and import. Maybe it's actually the third one. There. And then once you see it pop up in the background, I can click close. You can see this MAWM, which was 30 some odd kilometers away, and then my flight area is over here. And so now I have two options here. You don't need to do the RTX coordinates on the base from the CORS network because they already they apply that already. So now at this point, you have your raw data, you have your base station, and then you're gonna click whichever one you want, right click it, and do set base station. And then once it's done, it'll give you some statistics, and as long as this fixed solution is, I think usually more than, as long as it's more than 90, 95%, you should be good here, which is 100 is obviously higher, so I say okay. And now at this point, we're ready to do our GNSS inertial processor step. So we're gonna go infusion single base. We're gonna use that single one base, and then stabilize mount. This one was done with a gimbal. And so we say model and then run. This is where it does all of its smoothing and processing and blah, blah, blah. And once it says smoother completed, we're basically done. We just need to now export that file. So we're going to go to tools and export, and we're going to export the file as a custom smooth BET, which is SPET. And then we're going to tell it a name. So we want it to a name and location. So we'll go see images here, and then we're going to give it a unique name. It has to have the string SPET in it because that's what our software looks for. So do SPET demo and save. It's kind of confusing. You click save, but then you still have to actually click export after. That's just saving the location. And then at that point, you can either export it again to the other folder, or you can just make a copy and paste and put it into both of the flight directories. So in this case, I would go copy and then put it in the VNear folder, although there should already be one there, maybe not. And then we'll put it into the SWIR folder. And then we are good with our SPET file. So at this point, usually I don't even worry about saving the project because as you saw, that's relatively quick and straightforward to recreate. But if you wanted, you could go file, save, and save so that you could bring this back up at a future time. But I'm gonna not do that for now. Oh, there is one setting that you have to change the first time you install the software, which is outlined here. So you go to tools and then options and then import and process, and you want to check this use real-time reference to primary GNSS lever arm. You just want to make sure that is checked, which it is by default, it is not, so you'll have to go in and check that. And then everything else, this is all the stuff we just talked about. So go ahead. Don't have a LiDAR on this system, so I'll skip through that.
I Billy does have a LiDAR, so it might be good to go through that.
Okay.
He has a puck
Sure.
with the nano.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you kind of a, maybe not the full in-depth, I'll give you some high level info here. So we would have done a LiDAR test flight with that system. And so the flight kind of looks like this, where we go parallel and anti-parallel flight lines over our building, because it has some nice structure and relief. So we fly over, turn around, fly back, and then we go up to, that's at 40 meters, then we do it kind of the opposite direction here at 60 meters. That gives us different perspectives and orientations and altitudes of all the same stuff. And so we figure out what the recommended bore sighting offsets are for that system, and then that'll be provided with the flash drive, and then that way you wouldn't have to do any of this stuff unless over time, if it gets, you know, if it gets bonked during shipping or something like that, and you know, instead of a half a degree of roll, you think it needs a 0.6 or something like that. So, you know, you might need to make small adjustments over time, but in general, it seems to hold pretty well over time. So we would have done this, figured out what the right values are. We have this plotter program, which you can download from this link. Actually, somebody recently told me, I think this might be broken. Let's see if it's, yeah, I'll have to fix that. So if you're interested in that plotter, just let me know, send me an email or a support ticket, and I can send you a link to that. It's kind of a cool tool. It shows you, you can see these different screens. This one is the trajectory and the polygon overlaid. And we have altitude, latitude, longitude, and speed versus time, roll, pitch, and yaw versus time, and then kind of a 3D plot. But also then there's a fifth figure if LiDAR data is found, which has LiDAR versus latitude, LiDAR time versus latitude and longitude. And the difference being that the LiDAR is on a slightly different time scale, because once you start Hyperspec 3 and you disconnect the Ethernet cables, or for the Nano, just one Ethernet cable, then you would have to plug in that smaller white Ethernet cable into the front of the Nano, and that's where the LiDAR data gets streamed to the Nano at that time. And because there's some amount of time between when you click start and when you plug that data in, there's a slight offset, so you want to use these LiDAR times instead of the regular times. And so you'd go to this plotter program and figure out when your flight was taking place. So in this case, I would say, okay, looks like this, that's probably when I was over the parking lot. So I'd want to go from, we'll say 900 to 1200 or something like that. You don't want, any data while you're on the ground, or even really when you're doing your initialization down and back, you can exclude that. But then when you want to make sure you are choosing the correct times for what you're interested in. So let me just talk about what we have done here. So we would have figured out these, primarily it's just the roll and the pitch that are modified. So the default is 90 for roll, and you can see here by this image, it's kind of hard to tell, but this is actually the side view of our building, where it looks like we're getting 2 images of the roof. And so we say, okay, well, clearly there's only one roof, so we need to make an adjustment. And so in this case, then I went minus 0.3 degrees of roll to 89.7, and it looks like the roof got further apart from itself. And so that's clearly the wrong direction. And so I went 0.3 in the other direction, and then here now we only are seeing one image of the roof. So in this case, I would have given you this ortho INI or LiDAR INI file, which came with a roll of 90.3. And that way you would start with 90.3, and then you may still need to make small adjustments to do some fine tweaking, but at least you'll have a good starting point. And same thing with the pitch offset. Here's 0, where we're looking at this skylight. So this is the direction of the pitch. And so if I went to 0.3, it looks like it got worse. And then if I went minus 0.3, it looks like it is lining up correctly. So for this example, you would have started with 90.3 and minus 0.3, and then you would have had a good looking value to begin with. Billy, did you have any specific LiDAR related questions, or did you want me to go into a more in-depth example, or what?
I don't have any specific questions, but I also don't know anything about LiDAR really. I just have a general overview of it. So for someone who doesn't know anything about LiDAR, should you go into a more in-depth thing for me or us?
So I'll just give you a little more info, I guess. And then I guess what I would say is once you kind of get into doing some of this stuff, and if you are doing any of the processing and you have questions or, you know, any issues come up, you can reach out to me and I can help you from there. But so basically what the LiDAR is, elevation information. The system you have has 16 lasers that fire around and spin at about 200 hertz. And so it uses the same GPS as the system, obviously with the the correct offsets from where the GPS is to the sensor. But yeah, so it's spinning these lasers and firing out 16 different laser angles. And so from there, with the motion of the flight, we build up all these points. And then from those points, we have the associated how long it took for a return. So it says, okay, well, I know I was at this location, and then it took, a quarter of a second to get a return back. So because of, it does some internal math and it says, based on how far it was and blah, 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 and my orientation and the location of the GPS, I know that this point needs to be placed at this location. And so it's doing that and building up millions and millions of points over the course of a flight. And then from there, you can take all of those points and generate them into a point cloud, which is basically a 3D model of whatever you flew over with elevation information. And then from there, you can create an elevation model, which, let's see, you can do through our LiDAR tools software. So we have, yeah, I guess I'll just do a quick.
Could I ask a quick question? So the LiDAR is using
Sure.
the GPS from the Headwall. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yep.
And so is the IMU in the Headwall also?
Yes.
Okay, I did not realize that. I thought, and typically the LiDARs had better IMUs, or I don't know.
Well, there's a bunch of different levels, and so certainly
so the puck does have an IMU in it. It's you're using the Headwalls because it's a better one.
to my knowledge, I don't believe that the puck has an IMU in it. And if it does, then yes, we're using the better one from the Atlantics.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so here I'll do a quick processing example here. So the input file, we're going to click this little folder. Let's see if I have a good data set. Okay, so you're going to find this lidar.pcap.idx file and open it up. Hold on, let me do one other thing first. No, that's not a good example. do this. Okay, so you load in that pcap.idx file, and then it's going to have this output file as lidar.las. So I recommend you always, give it a more unique name. But then you can see it had that lidar ini file in that data directory, and so it automatically pulled in all these roll and pitch and the correct values for that system. So in this case, it looks like I have to select my times, so I'll do that next, but I want to go with a roll of 92.4 and a pitch of minus 0.P95. So I'll run that plotter quickly. So I'm gonna run my trajectory plotter. It asks for an IMU GPS file, so I'm going to find that directory. It's going to take a second, and it's going to spit out all those figures. Okay, so for this one, looks like this blue was my polygon, and then this was the flight directory. I think I did this one kind of on the fly, and so you can see I didn't do a very good job, and I missed collecting here and here, but that's a different conversation. And then here we have all of our roll, pitch, and yaw versus time, our altitude, latitude, longitude, and speed versus time, 3D plot, and then our LiDAR time. So for this one, I would say, okay, let's go from 720 to, well, I'm not going to do the whole thing because that'll take longer. So I'll just do this first, down and back, 720 to 966. So I'll put from 720 to 966, and maybe I'll put that in my name as well. You can see this minimum distance is set to 1, which is good. If you set it to 0, you actually get some returns from the aircraft. So you want to make sure you exclude those, although sometimes it's kind of helpful to have the trajectory in the sky that you can evaluate, but you obviously don't want that for any of your elevation or DEM creation. So you want to exclude that. So then I say no trajectory and go. You can see from that LiDAR INI, it automatically is using this post-process file and the pps.txt file. And we also recommend using this save timestamps checkbox. Once it's done, we're going to open up in this Cloud Compare software. So just give it a second here to finish. Almost there. Should be done. It should be done any second now. There we go. Okay, so once we're done with that, then we can open up Cloud Compare, which is, like I said, it's a free software, open source that you can download from the internet. I think it's provided by the government. File, open, and let's find where I generated that file. I think it was in here. 215, so that's what we did today. Open it up, and I'm not sure what any of this stuff means, so I say apply all and yes to all. You can see this has 53.5 million points. Okay, and then here we see all the lasers are colored by, I think, the laser numbers, so it kind of looks all funky. So we're going to click on the data, and then we're going to do edit, tools, projection, export coordinates to scalar field, and then we're going to change it to changing the elevation based on the Z data. And now if we go here, slide down, we're going to adjust our thresholds here. There. So now you can see the top of this tree was starting to turn red. The tops of these trees are all green, and the ground is blue. And so, see, these are all some cars and things like that. But when I first loaded this in, I saw that there was a couple speckles that looked like they were out of place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this point size default, make it bigger points, and you can see these. There's a couple of these red points here, which if I look at it from the side, what these are actually reflections from the sun, because the sun is emitting at 906 or whatever nanometers, which is what the LiDAR is spinning at. And so these are actually, we kind of want to sort these out because we don't want points in our sky. So we're going to go and do this little scissor icons, and we're going to do the segment tool. We're just going to draw a little box around the points we want to get rid of. Right click when we're done with our box, and then segment out. Click the check mark, and then it's going to split this into two separate point clouds. And so now if I'm happy with that, which everything looks pretty good here, I can then save this file save. And you can see, since I kind of cleaned it up, I'm going to save it as, I like to call it a clean cloud. Put it in the right spot. And then I'm going to go back to our LiDAR tools, and then there's this create DEM tab. And once that file is finished saving, I will load that file in, and then I can generate my DEM from that point cloud. Okay, so I'll load it in. So we have these couple different output values. So you can do min, max, mean, standard deviation, blah, blah, blah. If you hover over it, it'll tell you kind of a little description of each one. If you're going to be using this DEM for your hyperspectral processing, you only want to select a single output value, although you could generate a file that has multiple different levels, but that wouldn't work for the hyperspectral. So just click one for now. We recommend usually the mean, but you can kind of do whatever is best for you. And then you get to choose whatever the resolution or the spacing is. So we kind of find that the smaller you go, the higher, obviously the longer processing time. And we kind of find that below 0.5 meter spacing, it doesn't really, it just adds extra time without giving you too much the benefit. So, we kind of recommend a 0.5 meter grid, but you could certainly go, down to, a couple centimeters or, whatever you want. It just would take a lot longer. And so we find 0.5 meter seems to be good. So you can, again, give it a different name if you'd like. Maybe I'll call it DEM, and you can see it's going to be saved as a TIFF. And then I click go. Should be pretty quick. There we go. And then if you look in here, now I have this DEM that I just created from the flight. And so then I could use that for my hyperspectral processing.
Charles?
Yep.
So we purchased a separate LiDAR because a different scientist wanted a sort of a higher quality LiDAR. He's more interested in LiDAR data, but would it be possible to fly two separate flights and then import a DEM from that LiDAR and process
Certainly, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, you can you need an elevation model to do the hyperspectral processing. So whether that is using the generic USGS DEMs, or if you have a LiDAR on your system that you flew during your flight, you could, like in this example, we generate the file or the DEM from that LiDAR data. But if you don't have it on that specific system, you certainly could do it separately. So you would, probably what I'd recommend is you fly the area and then create your DEM, and then you fly the hyperspectral after, and then you can use that elevation for your hyperspectral processing. Just keep in mind that if anything changes, between when the LiDAR data was taken and when it was flown over, if there's cars that are in different spots, you'll just have to either live with some small artifacts in those areas where there's conflicting, what the imagery says and what the LiDAR data says, or you could cut out data from the LiDAR that you want to exclude. So you say, oh, I want to pull that car out, and you just cut it out. There's a ton of different processing kind of things you can do with that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, no, that should be totally fine. Okay, so I'm going to close out of this stuff for now. Okay, so next is, I'm not going to get into this too much, but I wanted to let you know about this new tool that we are working on / have a beta version that you can use if you are interested. It's called the batch processing tool, or the batch processing widget. If you go to these links, there's a tutorial video and a link to download. Like I said, it's not actually a officially released product, anything like that, but it seems to be very useful. So just keep in mind that it's not really a fully released product yet, so it could have bugs and issues and things like that. But basically what this does is it uses more or less a lot of the same code as our SpectralView uses, but it does some automation. So instead of doing all of your processing on a single flight, you can do it on what we call a mission, which would be a set of multiple different flights. And so how it works is it would look at the directory and say, okay, here's the flight data number 1. I'm going to go into that and convert everything from raw to radiance, and then from radiance to reflectance. And then from there, then it would actually go back and delete the radiance files, because typically you don't want those or don't do anything with them, and they just are extra space and they're easily recreatable if you need them later. So it would delete them for you. And so this way you could basically have a bunch of flights that you say, oh, I'm going to just let them run overnight or over dinner or something like that. And then when you come back, it's a lot less button clicking. So I'll kind of leave that at that. But I've found it to be a pretty helpful program. We are in the process of hopefully folding in orthorectification into that, which would be another added benefit to that basically just less stuff that you would have to do manually, but that's not quite ready yet, so I'll leave that there for now. It kind of looks like this. So you can do your processing on a single cube, a full flight, or a mission, which is multiple flights. Okay. Getting into the hyperspectral processing, I guess before I jump into this, does anybody have any other questions up until this point? Okay, great. So the order of operations is to collect your raw data. So it looks something like raw_0.hdr. And then you're going to convert your data to radiance using the radiometric calibration that we did on the system while it was at the factory. And that would turn your raw data into raw_0_RD, which means it has been converted to radiance. And then you're going to convert your radiance data to reflectance. So it'd be then adding an RF to the end, so raw_0_RD_RF. And then from there, then you want to do your orthorectification on your reflectance data. And so then you could add an OR to the end by orthorectifying it. Or if you're going to do orthorectification batch, you also have the option of generating just the IGM files, which is the image geometry model. And so essentially it would just take all the location data and put that into a smaller file that would be used for your multi-ortho for the mosaicing at the end. So let's, maybe I'll just do a quick, again, a live thing. Just give me 1 second to get all my files in the right spots. Okay. Okay, so here is the data for your system. So let's go open up the linear data. So, all right, let's look at, I'll open up the PNGs and look at which one has the tarp in it. Probably the last one, yeah, 14.4.4. Okay, cool. So I'm going to find that 14.4.4.8 and double click on the header file. When I'm doing my radiance and reflectance conversions, I want to select all of the data and then open it up. And then I'm going to click this radiance button. It automatically finds that radio calibration data if it sees it in my Headwall sensor config folder. And then I have to find manually my dark reference. And then it's going to generate this _RD file. So I click create. And then open. Again, select all the data and open. And looks pretty similar, but if we do our spectral plot here, this is the raw data, which is in raw digital counts. And then this is the reflectance, radiance data, which is in this crazy unit of radiance, which I don't know exactly how to pronounce. I think it's microflix or something like that. And so then at this point now we can take our radiance data and we want to convert it to reflectance. So to do that, we need to have our in-scene white reference. So I'm going to zoom in on this white portion of the tarp and click a spot that is uniform. So maybe not this spot because it's kind of creased. Same thing, there's a few other there. This looks pretty good right here. So I'm going to right click. You have two options. You can click classify or quick scene white reference. The quick scene white reference will just take the spectrum of that specific pixel you chose, which is fine in a pinch, but it's better to do the classify, and then you can take an average of all the pixels on the tarp. That way you can exclude certain ones that are in the crevices and things like that, but then you get a more representation of the actual spectrum. So we'll say classify. And you can see our seed pixel is the green, and then our calculated average is the black. The black is a little more smooth than the green. But what I'm seeing down here is that we are correctly classifying on the top portion, but then we're incorrectly classifying on the gray portion. So our spectral angle mapping limit of 0.07 is a little bit too high, so we need to make that a little bit less. We can also zero in on, just looking at this section a little bit. So we'll go instead of 0.07, we'll try 0.05. And that looks a little better. We are not classifying on as many down here, but we're still misclassifying on the gray. So let's try 0.03. And now we're only classifying in here, so that's good. I don't see anywhere else. And we have 1,500 pixels. So I think as a general rule, we want you want as many pixels as you can, but at least 500. So that's probably good. You could keep adjusting this SAM limit to kind of get as many as you can without misclassifying. But at this point, we're going to do this test calculated and see how it works when we reapply it to the whole scene. And you can see that was pretty good. Looks like there's 2 or 3 pixels down here that are misclassifying. So maybe let's try 0.28. We're still getting 500. And then if I do test calculated, now we're not getting any misclassified anywhere else. So, and we're mostly filling in. You can see these sections of the waviness, those are going away. So, and our seed and calculated are pretty much right on top of each other. So that's what we want. So once we see that, we're happy with that. We click save, calculated as white reference. We want to make sure we choose the correct reflectance profile. So in this case, the white is the 56%, the gray is the 30 or 32%, depending on which batch you got for the tarp, and then the bottom darker one is 11%. So we're going to say we chose the 56%, and then we're going to save it as the scene white reference file. Once we have that, then we
question.
Yep. Go ahead.
It looks from the image like you're getting some skew of the pixels due to roll in the sensor. Is there any way to correct for that?
You're saying like this right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the raw data. This has not been, none of the GPS data has been applied to this. So we're doing all this on all of our radiance and reflectance data on the raw, and then we will do our ortho after, and then it'll be corrected. So yeah, this is all just
okay.
Uncorrected raw data. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so just, I mean, I guess this is kind of obvious, but best practice, we're putting the tarp in within the image acquisition area, the target area.
Yeah, so there's a couple things you can do. Basically, you do always need to have your in-scene white reference collected during your flight. So what I like to do is actually, I guess if we go back to GCS for a second, I'll show you. I should have mentioned this before, I forgot. Import. Okay, so here's like a typical flight plan that I might use. And there. Okay, so you can see here's my polygon, here's my flight plan. I have built in this secondary polygon that's over here. So if I'm going to be taking off around here, I put my tarp in here, so I fly over the tarp when I'm on my way to my area of interest. That way, if I want to fly, one over here, one over here, one over here, I have the tarp near me, so I can fly over it on my way to and or from my area of interest, and I have kind of this dual polygon set up so that that way I don't have to move the tarp and I can collect it in every flight. But yeah, so you always want to make sure you collect data over the tarp during your mission. So whether that's putting it in your scene or putting a secondary polygon with the tarp nearby.
Right, and so both of those would be set for the same above ground level height for collecting it, correct?
Correct, yep.
I thought I saw something where they did a spectral on panel in one of the videos. Do they ever do that with at the beginning setting up the Headwall? Maybe I'm misremembering.
So when you're setting up your exposure values, you point the system at a white object. So
okay.
that, like I said, that would be a piece of plastic that's white plastic or PVC or even a white piece of paper. You certainly could use spectral on, and that would obviously be the gold, best thing you could do. But from experience, I've found that bringing Spectralon into the field is just a recipe for it getting dirty or banged up. And since those are expensive pieces, I would recommend using something that's a little more durable or not quite as costly to replace if you need to. So yeah, you would use that to set your exposure value, but you don't actually use the TARP for your actual in-scene reflectance conversion.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry, I misremembered.
No, that's okay. We have had some customers who have tried using, so like if you use our system in a lab, you would use a Spectralon panel and you would point the system at it and take a white reference by fully illuminating the panel and filling the whole AOI with that panel. So we've had some people who've tried to do this in the field with a Spectralon panel. So when they're doing that exposure, they would point the UAV at this panel and then take a, instead, like kind of like they do the dark cubes, you take a white cube of just the panel. The issue though is it's kind of difficult in the field to fully, have the AOI fully illuminated so that you're not getting any other contamination or anything like that. So we find that the best way is just to use the TARP. But I mean, there are, I guess different ways that you could mess around with it depending on what your workflow is.
Thank you.
Okay, so so we have now figured out our scene white reference, and so now I'm going to click the reflectance button, and I'm going to convert this radiance into RF reflectance by using the scene white reference file that we just created. So I'll click create and open, select them all, open, and now we are in units of reflectance, which is where we want to do all of our analysis on. And if you look at this, this black one, we see the red edge of vegetation because that's some grass. We expect these lines to be at approximately 56, 33, and 11-ish%. I might be in a little bit of a crease or something here. That one looks a little high, but that's okay. And so once we have our data into reflectance, we did that all on just one single cube. We would next want to do a batch radiance where we convert all the rest of the files to radiance, which I'm gonna, I guess I'll just do 2 just to save, so I don't do too much time waiting on the processing. So I'll just pretend I'm selecting all of them. I'll just select the first 2 and open. Calibration, again, we're gonna select our dark reference. And start. If you already have files there, you would want to overwrite them. And then similarly, you'd want to do the same thing with batch reflectance batch, and then you'd want to convert all your data to reflectance. So now we'll select all of our radiance files. Automatically uses that scene white reference again, and start. And so now you can see I have my raw data, my radiance data, and my reflectance data. And you can see this is relatively data intensive. So we start with about a half a gigabyte file. And then once we turn that to radiance, it turns into, it doubles. And then when we turn it to reflectance, it doubles again. So, this one file turned into, this half a gigabyte file turned into a 3 to 4 gigabyte file. So that's why, you want to make sure that you see I have this not used folder here. I've kind of gone through and removed any files that I didn't really want. Like for example, I flew over the TARP twice. So I said, okay, I'll just pick whichever one I liked best and, remove that. But just, keep that in mind when you're generating all this stuff, is that it's going to exponentially increase in file size. So just, keep that in mind, make sure you have enough disk space and things like that. And so once you have all of your data into reflectance, then you would want to do your ortho rectification on that reflectance data. So for today, since I didn't do everything into reflectance, I'll just do the ortho on the raw data, but the process is still the same. Any questions on any of the radiance or reflectance stuff? Cool. Okay, so now we will go back to our spectral view, and we're going to go open. And so you're going to want to do basically the same process for the veneer and the sphere. So you have to do everything kind of twice, once for each system, but the process is essentially the same. Okay, so I'm not going to do this on everything. I'll just pick a handful of, oh, wait, I want to do batch. No, I want to open a single one. So let's see which one I want to look at first. All right, so I'm going to look at this one first, 9792. 9792, I'll open up my header file. And when I'm doing this stuff, until I'm ready for the final end result, I only need to work in the RGB because it's about 100 times faster, because you're only looking at 3 bands instead of 270 or something. Okay, so here, so I'm going to show you quickly. The first step is to figure out your altitude offset. So I like to show this example with the parking lot because we have these nice parking lot lines and they're easy to see and understand. And then I'll show you or talk at least about how, when you're doing this in the field, then you probably don't have these nice, structures, how you would do it otherwise. So first we're going to open up our parking lot line images, and we're going to do ortho R. So in our directory here, there's a process folder which has this ortho.ini file. So I'm going to save that and make a copy in the directory here. So if I open this up, this tells me some info. It says the lens that was used is a 12 millimeter, a pixel pitch, roll pitch and yaw offset. So these values are what we come up with at the factory, and then we give this file to you so that you start with these values going forward. And then, you may, like I said earlier, you may need to make small adjustments. Instead of -0.02, maybe you find -0.035 works better. But we found for the flight that we did, we processed it and we were able to get a nice, ortho mosaic with these values. So you can start with these the next time. So if this file is in your data directory, it'll automatically pull these files in. Alternatively, it should be saved in this C Headwall sensor config NHS 291 or UVS whatever file. And so first it looks in the data directory. If it finds it, it'll use it. If it doesn't, then it looks in this directory. If it finds it, it'll use it. And if it doesn't, then it will use all zeros. So you can see it automatically found it in the data directory or the sensor config and pulled in these values that I have here. So it's automatically looking for this SBET file because I told it to use the high performance GPS. And there's this advanced settings here also, which is using this pps.text. The pps.text is pulse per second. So what it's doing is it sends out a pulse once a second, and then it reads that return value. And then it's a way of basically recalibrating the clock on the Nano once every second. So there's no way that it can drift over time. So it's improves the processing just a little bit, but it is helpful. So we want to use that check box here. There is this geoid correction box. So there's basically two main datums, the geoid and the ellipsoid. And so it depends on what datum the elevation model is in versus the datum that the hyperspectral was collected in. So if you're using a USGS DEM, you would want to use this geoid correction checkbox, and it would, what it does is it would go to basically a lookup table, and it says, okay, for your location, there is a offset of whatever between the geoid and the ellipsoid, and it would apply that in the background. But if you're doing a LiDAR DEM, at least the one with the LiDAR provided by Headwall, everything would be collected in the same datum, so you would not want this checkbox, so we'll leave that unchecked for now. And then you just, if you're using that third-party LiDAR, you just have to figure out which datum it was collected in. Probably you would have this unchecked, but you would just basically look at the data once you process it and see if it looks like it's the correct aspect ratio, and if not, then you would click that checkbox to try the opposite way. So since we're using a LiDAR DEM, we're not going to click that. So we have this.
A quick interruption. I'm still seeing a file list on a file explorer. I'm not seeing any correction. There we go.
I apologize. I was looking at the wrong screen. I forgot you couldn't see that. Okay, so I apologize here. So yes, thank you for correcting me there. So we opened up this file. We're looking at these parking lot lines. I don't know what this weird little white thing is, but so we have here this advanced setting, so no, that's what I was talking about here. We have this use post process file, which is saying to use this SBET that we generated, and then we have this use pps.txt file, which is using that pulse per second info that I was just talking about. And then we have this geoid correction checkbox, which is what I was talking about between setting up the, choosing the correct datum. So because this data was taken with the same datum as the hyperspectral data, or this DEM was taken with the same datum as the hyperspectral, we don't need this geoid correction. But if it was taken in the opposite or in the wrong one, then you would click this and it would apply that offset in the background. So we'll leave this -0.2 and -1.1 for now, because that's what we determined were the correct offset values. But I'm going to talk about this altitude offset here. So for now, I'll just set this to 0 quickly. And then I'm going to do this save to ortho INI locally. So what this is going to do is it's going to either generate that ortho INI file and place it in that flight directory with all these settings, or if there's one already there, it will update it to have whatever changes we have made. And so I'm going to say start. And now we have applied that GPS data to this data cube, and it has oriented it how it's supposed to be. And this is what I was talking about earlier. So when you fly in a non-cardinal direction, you get all this null data in the corners. And so this is what's making the file a lot bigger than it needs to be, because all this is just, zeros. But to get it to line up with the parking lot, that's how we had to fly this one. So this file is going to be bigger than it really needs to be, but I guess that's okay for this instance. But I just wanted to point that out so that you, whenever you can, you should fly in a cardinal direction, because it'll make your data a little more manageable sized. And then next, and then we have our RGB selected, and then we're going to create the cube. Open it up, select, open. And now I'm going to say, so what the altitude offset is doing is it is trying to set the aspect ratio correctly. So by either making your data higher or lower so that it is projecting correctly into the right spots on the ground. So I'm going to look at it as compared to this Google Maps right here. And obviously the hyperspectral data here is much more accurate than Google probably is. However, the aspect ratio is the same for both. So that's why we can use it as a comparison for the altitude offset. So if we look at this little toggle in the bottom left here, we can change our transparency. And I'm looking at, see, this guy looks like it's lining up pretty well, but these guys are off. You see that? So what that's telling me is it looks like our data is too wide. So if I need to make it smaller so that the aspect ratio is correct, and so I'm going to have to add a negative altitude offset. So I'm going to redo that again. And I think I said minus 2.5 is what I had.
How do you bring in Google Maps into the overlay? Is that part of the software, or did you have to like export
Yep.
from a Google Maps browser?
It's just this little magnifying glass is the overlay in Google Maps button. So you click that, and then it just pops it right up. Obviously, you need to have an internet connection to, pull that in. But and so then if we look here, you can kind of see the change in size. This one was a little thicker or a little wider. And now if we look at this one, it should be more or less, looks like it's overlaying correctly. And so it's okay if the whole thing is, if there's a global offset. So if all the parking lot lines are off by the same amount, that's okay. They may not line up perfectly here, but as long as the spacing is equivalent between the two, that's what we're really looking for here, if that makes sense. So this is how I like to do that, because I have the access of these, access to these nice straight lines that have some structure. Clearly, when you guys are doing your stuff, you probably won't have something so nice as this. And so what I like to recommend people do is use the tarp, because everybody should have the tarp in their image. So we'll open that up. Okay, and so here's that. We will orthorectify that guy. We'll just start with our minus 2.5 that we decided was correct, but you do the same process, start with 0 and then pick a direction, positive or negative, and see if it gets better or worse. Save to locally and start. Okay, and now next, create, open. Okay, so now we have our tarp is corrected in square like it should be. And so in this case, instead of overlaying to Google Maps, because we wouldn't have the tarp in the Google Map data, what I would recommend doing instead is there's this little snapshot icon. So we'll do a quick snapshot. I'll just put it on the desktop for now. And it saves that file as a PNG. And then I can open up, there's a free program called ImageJ, which is kind of an image analysis software. And you can drag and drop that file in here. And then, I mean, you can do this in QGIS or ArcGIS, probably anything that you can measure pixel lengths. So I'm going to go and click this little line button, and I'm going to say, okay, from there to there is 110.4 pixels. And then from there to there is 105.4. So, you could probably zoom in and get it, exact. But within a couple pixels is probably good enough. And so in this case, I'm just looking, it's a square item, it's a square tarp. My length should be the same pixel size as my width. And so if I'm 104 in one direction, I should be about 104 in the other direction. And so, if I was off, then I would need to adjust my altitude offset until this square thing was square. So I could, you could probably adjust that to be a little bit more fine, but I think the 2.5 is probably good enough for at least for this example. So the altitude offset is something that is going to have to be adjusted on a per flight, per location really basis. It's, changes from location to location. And so, we've given you the values for the roll and the pitch and things like that. The altitude, you're gonna have to probably adjust on a case-by-case basis. So that's always kind of the first thing that you'll do in your ortho rectification. Okay, so once we have our altitude set, we will go batch ortho rectification batch. And again, I'll just pick a couple in here. Again, and normally I'd be doing this on the reflectance data, but since I didn't process everything to reflectance, I'll just do it on the raw for now. But the process is still the same. So I say open. This should be about 2 or 3 flight lines. I have my SBET automatically because it found it because I'm asking for this APX. It looks in my DEM folder, see Headwall DEM, and finds the highest resolution DEM that it has of that area. So I'm going to keep with this one. If you wanted to use a different DEM or it didn't grab the one you want, you could always click 3 dots and navigate and select the correct one that you want to use. It pulled in that ortho INI file with all these values that we have. Again, I want to save the ortho INI locally to update that file if I make any changes. I wouldn't really recommend using this to sensor config folder. What that's going to do, that's going to update the one that's in your sensor config folder. So that's kind of your factory one. I wouldn't make any changes to that unless you say, oh, well, Charlie came up with -0.2, but I really think -0.3 is a better starting point. So if you think that you want to update the factory one, you can do that by saving to the sensor config folder, but otherwise just update locally. And then at this point, now we're going to say, the other thing is this save only longitude and latitude data into these IGM files. So it's not going to spit out individual orthorectified cubes. It's going to spit out these cubes that have the latitude and longitude information, which will then be plugged into the multi-ortho to generate the final stitch data. If you don't check this, it'll take a little bit longer and you will get those individual cubes, but usually we recommend skipping that and only saving these IGM files. So we'll say next. All of them are automatically selected. Next and start. Okay, and then once we have finished that, we're going to go corrections multi-ortho, find our files that we just generated. We're going to select the IGMs. Next. Again, for now, we'll just do the RGB. Next. And you can see here, it gives you kind of an overlay of which files were selected. So it looks like you can, if you highlight over, it says that one is 7136. This one is 7472. And so if you say, oh, well, maybe I actually don't want that one. So I can go back and say, let's get rid of that. And now I'm only getting these 3 flight lines. You can see there's these are the overlapping regions here. If you wanted, you could give it a name, RGB or something, and and then it tells you the resolution is like that, and then create cube. And then once you are happy with that, you say open, select open. Clearly, when this was flown, it was, I think it was the end of January last year. So the grass is, there's no snow, but the grass is all pretty much dead. So not a lot of, green stuff here. And it might have been a darker day too. But then you can see, looks like these 3 passes are all mosaic together now. And I don't really see anything that would need to be changed. So I'm kind of looking at overlapping regions, so kind of along here and along here. And you could say, if you see anything that is, any artifacts, you would, maybe want to go back and adjust your roll or adjust your pitch or something like that. But actually, from this example, I'm not seeing anything that is obvious. Maybe you can see like right here, that is slightly off. So maybe I would go back and adjust my pitch just a little bit. In general, you're going to be able to resolve a lot of the artifacts, but you probably, over a large area will have some that are going to be present regardless of how, you might change your results so that, you're processing nice up here, but then you might get a small artifact over here or something like that. So the name of the game is to use the default values that we gave you, and then make small adjustments as needed to try and maximize how the image looks best over the entire area of interest. So if you did see an issue, you would go back to your orthorectification batch, and then you'd say, okay, well, instead of -0.2, maybe I want -0.25, just a little bit more, or maybe I want just maybe a little bit less, like 0.15. And so you'd make your adjustments, small little adjustments, and then you'd go back and it's kind of a guess and check, see how, did that make it look better or worse? Did I go too far? Did I not go far enough? And then you would, keep modifying your values until you're happy with the end result. I kind of recommend that you stick to one value at a time. So you adjust the roll until you're happy with it, and then you adjust your pitch until you're happy with it. And then maybe you need to go back and, adjust your roll a little more because the pitch changed where the, things were, blah, blah, blah. But, at least to begin with, while you're still kind of learning, just do one at a time, because then it's kind of better to, it's easier to understand what the, what that change did. And I think that is more or less it for what I had planned. I guess looks like we still have 10, 15 minutes left. So I'll, I guess, open the floor to any questions, or if there's anything that you guys wanted me to go over again, or anything. I guess the floor is open.
So this process you walked us through, thank you for all the details, and I'm excited to have this recording to refer back to. We have to go through this for each of the flight lines, right? We can't assume something similar in the metrics you were just talking about with the pitch and the roll and such, right? We would need to examine each flight line individually, or do you think they would have a pretty similar correction factor?
So the whole point is that you should be able to take this value that we gave you, this -0.2 and this -1.1, and apply that to the entire flight. Obviously, if you wanted to, you could go on a line-by-line basis, and you could probably, that would be, if you said, okay, this line needs -0.18, and this line needs -0.21 or something. Like you could really dial it in if you go on a line-by-line basis, but that's going to be a lot more work and a lot more difficult. So the thought is you don't need to do it on a line-by-line basis. You can just use these values that we came up with, as long as you understand that there may be some small artifacts here and there. You probably won't be able to get everything perfect. If you really needed everything to be perfect, then yeah, I would say you probably want to go on a line-by-line basis, but it's really just kind of the pretty picture at the end. So it depends on, I guess, how important that is for you. But in general, with this high performance GPS, and especially things on a gimbal, you should be able to just take the values that we gave you, and maybe they need to be tweaked on a flight by flight basis just a little bit. But in general, you can take those values and they'll be, a 90-95% of the way starting point. And then you can tweak them to best fit that flight. So yeah, on a flight by flight basis, you may need to make small adjustments, but you don't really need to do it on a line by line basis unless that gives you any, if that is better for your workflow, then sure you can, but that's extra work, I guess.
Thanks.
Yep.
I think you're using a 40% overlap in your flight line design.
Correct. Yep.
And I think we're generally more doing us, and that doesn't look like 40 in the image there, but they're different collects. Andy, I don't know if, I thought we were using more than that.
Yeah, we're doing structure for motion, so it's a different thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so exactly with the line scanning, you don't need, like if you're using Pix4D and things like that, you're probably doing more like 60 to 80% overlap. For the hyperspectral stuff, you don't need that crazy extra. Basically, what we're trying to make sure is just that we don't have any gaps between our lines. So like you can see, we programmed this at 40. This one's probably not quite 40. This one's a little bit less. It depends on how the UAV was flying that day. And so, you tell it to be at an altitude of 60 meters. They're not super high grade GPSs on the system themselves. So you say fly at 60 meters, it may be at 58, it may be at 61. It's probably not going to be perfect unless you have like an RTK. So that's kind of, we say 40 because we know that, you're never going to be off by, enough to make you have gaps in your data, I guess. So, and then that also gives you a little bit of play, if you have a roll offset, you need to adjust your data side to side. So yeah, that's kind of where that comes in. But yeah, you don't need more than 40, certainly. And as you can see, this was set at 40%, and this one was probably only like, more like 10 or 15% of actual coverage. So, and that's fine. We're just making sure as long as we're not missing any data. So that's why I wouldn't really recommend going lower than 40. 40 is kind of that, middle happy ground that kind of seems to work the best, just from our experience. So, you can certainly experiment and say, okay, well, maybe 35 is a little bit better, and we don't, that, we're still happy with that. And then sure, you can do it. That basically, we're just trying to make sure you don't miss any data,
Okay.
And so have you, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, have you guys taken the system out of the box and kind of, messed around with it at all? Or has it been basically just sitting since you received it, since you were waiting for the training?
The co-aligned has been sitting for the most part. I mean, I've pulled it out and kind of felt how heavy it is. That's about it.
Yeah. Okay. I just, since we're doing this training remotely, it's, obviously it would be better if you were either I was with you or you were here to kind of, have some hands-on, looking at things. So I guess, when you go to, attach the sensor, it should be with this circular quick release mount. So you'll open up the lever, you'll there's a little button that you'll push, and you'll slide the gimbal mount up into that. And then that little button will pop back out, and then it'll be loosely in the mount. And then to kind of lock it in, you close that lever. So just, when you're first going, if you have any questions about how to mount it or anything like that, let us know. It should be pretty straightforward, but, I just want to make sure you guys are, understand how to,
Sure.
attach everything. And, then
Well,
you want to connect the power and the GPS, and then it'll be good.
I'm hoping to go over that with BFD because although I guess they I guess, did they have the instrument when they were setting this up? Because they had to set up the mounts on the copter. So did you guys send them the head wall and then they shipped it back to you to do the rest of the integration?
I think so. I mean, I know we definitely test flew your system at
I
Headwall,
get,
so that means that either they put the mounts on or we did. I can't remember, but it would have been all set up so that it's basically just a plug and play kind of thing.
yeah, they may have just had the gimbal, since it's gimbaled,
Yeah,
you know. Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate it. I think this is a good start. But yeah, obviously we gotta keep moving ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say, the next steps would be to, reach out to the VFD folks and get some, info and training from them. And then once you're, comfortable with the UAV, then you can put the system on and, try a flight on your own. And then from there, you can, go to process it. And then once you do that, then you'll probably run into questions or, things that you forgot about or anything like that. And then you can reach back out to me and I can try and help you from there.
Sure.
I have a
Yeah.
couple of quick questions. If we've gone through all these steps and we've processed it to georectified surface reflectance, would you continue to use SpectralView for, extracting local means and data analysis, or would you flip it into Envy for that? And
Yeah, so that's
my
really,
other
really up to
question was,
you.
how would you address ground control points?
Yeah, so all of our software or all of our data is written and exported in an NV compatible way. So if you're going to do any really heavy analysis and you have NV, certainly feel free to use that. We do have a classification module, which within SpectralView, it's not nearly as involved as NV. So you can certainly use our stuff, or you can use NV. It's kind of up to you and what you're looking to do and what's most what's easiest for your workflow, I guess. And then
I would
in terms
say
of ground,
we have sampling points on the ground that we would go to those locations and extract the mean of however many pixels in a radius around that location, and then bring that into a stats program.
yeah, that seems like a reasonable way. And then in terms of ground control points, I mean, there's not really a way in our software to import, GCPs for the geolocation or anything like that. So you would, you might be able to use them for visually, saying here's a ground control point, and you can, then use that as a visual tool to line up your orthorectification. But there's not a way to import those GCPs into our software.
So
Okay,
could
so
you take
use
your
it in
output?
addition to the tar to play around with those variables.
Sorry, I heard a couple different things there. So go ahead.
My last comment is, so you'd use the ground control points visually the same way you use the tarp or the lines in the parking lot to adjust your height offsets and pitch and roll until you feel like it's right.
Exactly. Yep.
But wouldn't it also be possible to take the output image from your software and then take it into the NV and do a, rubber sheeting or whatever it is, further correct it in NV using ground control points?
Yeah,
Or
I'm
would
sure. I
that
mean,
degrade the
I
data?
can't really, I can't really speak too much to that because I don't have really any background with using NV, so I don't really know exactly what the options are in that. But yeah, if you can take our stuff and put it, any of our things are compatible with NV, so you could take anything from us and put it into NV, and then do anything really that NV is capable of. So at that point, it's kind of up to you and whatever you want to do, slash whatever NV is capable of doing.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I think the ground control point correction in QGIS is pretty good. And QGIS is a more traditional GIS. Envy is optimized for raster analysis. But working in QGIS is similar, and you can do that GCP correction fairly well.
Yeah, and we've had some of my colleagues use QGIS often to do some of that stuff. There is even if I could probably dig it up. I don't know if I have a local copy, but there is a way that you can do some like I just showed you, you put in your roll pitch and you make your adjustments just kind of by guess and checking. There is kind of a way that you can do that more, by having two anti-parallel points and saying, okay, well, they have a distance between them of this, and then you can do some math to kind of, calculate what the roll and pitch estimates should be. So, there's certainly other ways you can do that or use other different programs and things. So, I kind of just showed you the generic way, but, feel free to use any other programs that you want and any other, do whatever works best for you guys and your workflows.
When you're at that point and you're adjusting the pitch and yaw, you can, in the image, can you actually see the lat long of different pixels or do measurements between objects other than pixel measurements?
I don't know if you can do that in our software or not.
Okay, well, it's something to look at, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you could
Yes.
actually pull the positions of the ground control points, then you could play with that a bit, I think.
Your software just does lat long, right? It doesn't do UTM?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not positive.
That's the quickest way from meter distance if you had 2 points of known distance apart.
Yeah, I think it is just lat long. But so if you have some questions like this that I don't necessarily know the answer to off the top of my head, feel free to write those to me in an email or in a support ticket, and I can kind of go dig around and ask some of our software people who may be more involved in writing the code and can kind of look that info up for me.
Sure. I mean, this is down the road. We got to get to the point of collecting data first.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say and the other thing is on the flash drive. If you guys end up being able to find it, there is this same data set of your system, so you can feel free to mess around with that. Set everything to zeros and see if you can recreate what we kind of came up with here. And then I would say, like I said, get your training from the UAV stuff, and then get the sensor integrated on and do a test flight, and then from there see if you can do it on your own, and if not, come back with questions and I'll be happy to help. But you'll have the you'll have this recording, you'll have the PowerPoint slides, so everything should be good to go.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for all the details.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. So I will end this recording, and then I will send this out to you guys later today or tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks.